So thank you again, Dave, for joining us as I clumsily exchanged emails with you. So I appreciate your graciousness as we moved through that, especially with time zones and setting context and everything. The question that we were hoping to explore is there room for hope, which is kind of a loaded question given everything going on. But we don't need to stick to it too strongly. Let's just meander through a conversation and see where we end up. But just before we're chatting, on the beach, Waltzing Matilda. What's the Melbourne connection there?
Well, I mean, On the Beach is a famous film. Ava Gardner and Fred Astaire and Gregory Peck. And it's about the end of the world. It was one of the dire World War III nuclear war films, and by far the scariest and saddest. I mean, after all, Dr. Strangelove, which I think is the greatest film ever made, and arguably saved all our lives as a self-preventing prophecy. Dr. Strangelove ends with a note of resignation to the end of the world, recognizing how just incredibly gorgeous and artistic those mushroom clouds were. Yeah. Whereas On the Beach really drove it home. And the last outpost of humanity is Melbourne.
Right.
And it's, as I was saying before we started recording, arguably these films are the reason why you who are listening, including Nick, are actually alive and exist. Why I'm alive and exist is because science fiction did its job. The highest form of science fiction is not predictive. Oh, I have a fantastic score in predictive stuff. You know, my novel Earth is ranked on almost all the top 10 predictive novels. And we all pray that the Postman won't be.
Yeah.
But the really highest form of science fiction is the self-preventing prophecy. And Nick, my host, will have a link at the bottom to my essay about self-preventing prophecies. But basically, these are stories that are so compelling, so affecting of the audience or the reader, that people are motivated to act to prevent it from ever coming true. The movie Soylent Green, for example, and Silent Spring and other Silent Running and other ecological movies and books help to recruit tens of millions of environmentalists. And if we make it, it will be by the skin of our teeth, and therefore almost anything that really helped a lot will have saved us. Nuclear war, retired military officers admit that the scenarios that were described in On the Beach, Failsafe, and Dr. Strangelove, and War Games all caused serious meetings that helped to make sure that those scenarios didn't happen. And of course, the granddaddy of self-preventing prophecies would be George Orwell's 1984, which, people have told me to read that year after year after year after year as a dire warning. And I just read it last week, and I have to tell you, things were a lot worse then. I'm referring to 1984.
Yeah.
It's better if delivered by a young person like you, because then it's plausible that you had read it for the first time and you had no memories of 1984.
I actually haven't read 1984, embarrassingly, but I have read Huxley's Brave New World, and I feel like...
Well, that's the one that is starting to look more and more compellingly like it's plausible. And the reason why it's starting to win is because 1984's version of a boot in the face, endlessly stupid and cruel dictatorship seems less likely now than that over time our rulers would try to divert us with pleasure.
Mm.
But of course, this is a topic that we're trying to navigate right here in the United States, and everybody in the world cares about how things turn out the next 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But to finish the thought, and when you read 1984, be sure and tell that joke.
All right.
I read 1984 last week. People told me it was, to read it, and I don't know what everybody's all so gloomy about. Things were much worse then. I think it's a great joke. Anyway, 1984 affected millions, certainly of Americans. And it had the effect of making almost all of us, it was already in our mythology, as it is in the Australian mythology, a suspicion of authority. Mm. And so in decent times, not Civil War times, which is what we're in right now, but in decent times, an average American conservative is more concerned about elites who are trying to become big brother from the left, snooty academics and faceless government bureaucrats. A person of the liberal or moderate left is more concerned about elites who are trying to accumulate undue authority, who are conniving aristocrats and faceless corporations. Now, it happens at this moment that one of those two sides is absolutely right, and besides which, if you go look at 6,000 years of human history, I dare you to name more than 3 or 4 times when bureaucrats were the main problem affecting freedom. It was vastly more often conniving aristocrats who took other men's women and wheat and conspired to make sure their sons wouldn't have to work for it, wouldn't have any competitors. That's the great illness of the last 6,000 years that we've been breaking away from, and it's trying its very best to reimpose itself right now: feudalism, oligarchy, aristocracy. But that doesn't make me a leftist. I'm a follower of Adam Smith, actually, who warned that, and actually Ayn Rand warned that. Aristocratic cheaters are always the worst problem. Mm. So in any event, the self-preventing prophecy of Orwell worked fine when those on the left who said, I'm more worried about faceless corporations and aristocrats, those on the right saying, I'm more worried about academics, snooty academics and faceless government bureaucrats, when they were able to say the sacred catechism of science that all scientists are taught to recite, and that is, I might be wrong. Maybe you are looking at my elites and maybe you're right. So you keep an eye on them. I'm going to keep an eye on yours. And we'll both work together to use the great tool of the Enlightenment that we've been perfecting too gradually. And that is reciprocal lateral accountability, mm-hmm. rather than top-down accountability imposed from above, which is being perfected right now in Beijing. So these are these 2 models for the future. One based on 6,000 years, 99% of the time, pyramidal social structures with a few elites at the top, imposing order on those below. And if we're going to have that, and I think this could help explain the absence of evidence for aliens, that's called the Fermi paradox. Because it's such a strong attractor state, it drew in 99% or more of human cultures. Because it benefited the strongest males with swords. We're all descended from the harems of these guys who pulled it off.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons males have weird fantasies. Some of us behave ourselves well, despite those fantasies. And some of us have wives who say, enjoy what's going on in your head, just behave well.
Yeah,
I'm a lucky man.
So is this?
Go on, please.
Sorry. So just to pull some threads together. Is this what your fear is, I guess, at the moment, or observation? And from going through your writings, there are sort of two threads. One is that this open society that we live in at the moment is actually the anomaly when we look back across human history. It's not the status quo. In fact, the status quo is more oligarchical and feudal. And so that's one point. And then the other point being that we've lost the ability to have that lateral accountability, and that if we're going to recover any form of open society off the back of what we're experiencing right now, we need to acknowledge that democracy in the open society is the anomaly, and we need to sort of step up to help protect that, and doing that will require this lateral accountability.
A very good summation.
Yeah.
There have been a few experiments. Now, I was talking about the Chinese Communist Party. They are just spewing out vast amounts of propaganda, some of it very intelligent and clever, about why only a top-down party state whose oligarchy happens to have been raised believing in the people in the long run. That unlike all the other oligarchies, they can be trusted with power. And I'm going to surprise you by saying, if I had to choose a pyramidal oligarchy from all of history, I would choose a Chinese version, because they do have a very strong tradition of meritocracy. So the brightest and cleverest boys, and they might even include girls in this future era, can compete to find a place in the bureaucracy and bring their family and bring their genes in. And this is something that Huxley actually incorporates in Brave New World. If you're an exception or an anomaly and break out of the gamma type or break out of the beta type, you're not wiped out. You're analyzed for the potential that, all right, you did it. Now you're a beta.
Well, don't they ship them off to an island to live?
Well, yes, but the alphas aren't killed. That's the point that Mustafa Mond makes. Mustafa Mond, in his most famous speech, and most famously delivered in the version that was where he was played by Leonard Nimoy. Mustafa Mond, no, he didn't do this. Mustafa Mond says, we know eventually this will break. We know eventually we'll have to loosen it up. You alpha dissidents are welcome to argue each time. And every generation, there's a bunch of you. And we have to tell you, we're not persuaded this time. But go off to the islands, surf, work on your case. Now that's a very different kind of top-down pyramidal society. And that one is, boy, it's like a beehive. It's totally controlled. And that is something that the Chinese Communist Party wants to achieve. I don't think we'll ever make it to the stars if that happens. I think that's one of the explanations for the Fermi paradox. But it would be a fairly peaceful, serene version of top-down oligarchy. And over time, the upper classes would become as superior as they always claimed to be in feudalism. I happen to believe in the exception. Periclean Athens, Da Vinci's Florence, to some degree, Venice, to a large degree, Amsterdam during the Renaissance, and especially us. We're the only ones who kept one of these revolutions against the pyramidal structure going for 240 years, 250 years, or if you allow the Brits to claim the English Revolution, 1688, sort of. The point is that there are certain tools, and freedom per se is a tool to get the tool. The real problem is that when you have these pyramidal cultures, the top guys can kill their critics. It is in their best interests to kill their critics. In China, we're seeing it now. When you do that, you personally get to keep your harem. for a while, until your malgovernance, the lack of criticism, results in malgovernance that brings the whole thing down. Criticism is the only known antidote to error and delusion. I said the sacred catechism of science is, I might be wrong. Well, us scientists reciting that helps us to develop habits that probably enable us to be the most error-free profession ever. We can probably eliminate half of our stupidities, and we are still totally delusional humans. The way you get most of your errors is reciprocal criticism. Because we're all delusional, but I don't have the same delusions as you have. Therefore, you can see many of mine, and I can see many of yours. And you, as my rival, will gladly criticize my mistakes. And I will reciprocate. If you look at it right, it's a gift economy. It's actually the way things ought to be. And if you are an artist, in my science fiction novels, I circulate my manuscripts to 30, 40, 50 people. You can find their names at the back of the books. Because I have become able to hunger for the criticism that has enabled me to rise up and improve my product and become somebody noteworthy in my field.
So do you think that's broken down in the
go
US at the moment? Is it that we've lost the ability to be critical, or evenly critical, I guess? Like we're less critical of our own group and more critical of others?
No, we haven't lost the ability to be critical. The internet has made sure of that. As a matter of fact, our mythology, our suspicion of authority mythology, and the internet, which enables us to see and criticize each other, these have all both been leveraged by our enemies to exacerbate our worst traits. Now, this is not the first time it's happened. In the 1400s, when the printing press was invented, Gutenberg made a Bible, and then for the next 100 years, most of the produce of printing presses was horrible pamphlets spreading hate across Europe. The religious wars of Europe were exacerbated by the printing press, terribly. But over time, the optimists proved right. Books started spreading and people started understanding things that they did not have in their own experience and in their own heads. And at the same time, we got glass lenses that expanded vision and perspective that expanded our ability to pay attention. And every generation since then has seen either major or minor increases in the ability to know more, to see more, and to attend to more. And every time optimists said, this is going to make us better, and they proved right in the long run. But every time pessimists said, people can't drink from a fire hose. They need curation of all this information, or it's going to be a calamity. And it always was. Radios and loudspeakers were the great new inventions for communication in the 1930s. And it almost was the death of us. When gifted Savonarolas learned to use these techniques to make themselves seem godlike. And they took over everywhere, except in the English-speaking world. And we had gifted orators then too, but those happened to be on our side. And I don't know whether it was a happy accident or something about the culture that made us choose orators who are on our side. The only exception to this rule, and you can see this rule is holding with the internet, we may all die from our inability to properly grasp how to use this fecund, vast exponentiation of communication. We can't afford the long time scale to have it become something that matures us and makes us greater minds.
Yeah.
But one exception is television. Now, I had a cousin named Newton Minow, and he was famously said in the 1950s that TV was a vast wasteland. Well, maybe it was culturally, but television was curated. it was limited to a dozen stations per city, or you in the Commonwealth had 2, if you were lucky. And because it was curated, the worst inflammatory stuff didn't get into the public psyche. In fact, Martin Luther King and Gandhi and the victims of McCarthyism all credited television with saving their lives. So it's ironically a medium that we are taught to hold in contempt was the only one that I can think of that expanded human consciousness and our perspective without driving us crazy first.
It's true. I mean,
go ahead.
First of all, there's a buzzer in the room next to me. So in a moment, I'm going to go turn it off. But I'll throw my question at you first, because particularly in Australia right now, there's a lot of criticism over News Corp and the Murdoch press. And here we have the owner of the traditional media influencing our politics.
How in the world could you have anything to say about that man and that family, except love? I'll tell you what, we are suffering because of what's been inflicted on us by people who think of themselves as true aristocrats in the sense of being superior beings. And the burden of proof is on them, because that is naturally what you would think, even if you lucked into your superior position, or you inherited it, or you got it because of cheating. You would naturally think, surround yourself with sycophants who tell you that you achieved it all because you were brilliant. Peter Thiel recently said, and I think he's very, very bright. But his biggest investment was a pure lucky accident. He said he no longer believes that freedom and democracy are compatible. And what that carries is it's explicit almost, implication that the mob is going to come and take his stuff. Well, the mob's done pretty well. You name any type of accomplishment that has any value whatsoever, and the democratic nations did orders of magnitude better than all previous aristocratic pyramidal civilizations combined. Outcomes matter. And we did it by expanding our circles of inclusion, which is a whole nother topic, because that is a fetish on the left, but it's a fetish that's aimed in a direction that has done us nothing but good. Mm. Some of their behaviors in trying to guide us in that direction are sometimes obnoxious, but the direction is the right one, as proved by our success.
So taking 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards when we look at the current state of the world at the moment, and my question around Murdoch as well wasn't meaning to insinuate that we're nostalgically looking back on the traditional media as a better time either. But when we look at the present times that we're trying to make sense of, is that how you're making sense of the division and complexity right now? Is the fact that us, advanced apes haven't figured out how to use these communication tools that we now have at our fingertips effectively? Is that, and it's being hijacked by other groups? Is that
my blog is called Contrary Brin.
Yeah.
And it's because I am contrarian. I remember all of my past lives, and in all of them I had this personality. You don't remember your past lives, so memory doesn't carry through. So what carries through? Your personality. And by the way, I am using that as a metaphor. I'm joking. But I remember that all my past lives, I was killed by the time I was 16 because I had this ornery contrarian personality. I remember I told Napoleon, "Hey, Napoleon, you're emperoress. I hear they have snow in Russia." In other words, trying to apply criticism
Mhm.
as the antidote to error. And boy, was that an error on old Nappy's part. And yes, that was a joke. People have written to me afterwards saying, yeah, Brin believes in reincarnation. The point is that this civilization let me, I'm going to have a big milestone birthday in 7 days. And, let me have kids and be a person of influence. Why? Because my ornery contrariness actually is welcome in this culture.
Yeah.
So all of that was a big rigmarole to say that when I am around optimists and Pollyannas, boy, you should hear me throw bricks. And I throw bricks in a lot of my books and warnings. But when I'm around people who are gloomy and they've lost their morale to fight, oh, there is so much good news. There is so much.
Mm-hmm.
During the last 70, 80 years, we have reduced the fraction of children living in grinding poverty, meaning they can't go to school and they have bouts of real hunger, from 70, 80% down to well under 10%. 90% of the world's children go to school and have never been grindingly hungry.
I mean, that's
it's nowhere near good enough. Nowhere near good enough. We should keep our standards rising. And much of the world is highly critical and justifiably so toward Pax Americana. But it is the first empire that has ever said there should be an end to empires. And the ratio of good to bad deeds is unsurpassed across the annals of history. There are some really howler bad deeds, but the list of actual palpable accomplishments that happened because almost all of the defense budget burden for the last 80 years in Western civilization was carried by one country, allowing almost every other country in the Western or neutral world to have very low defense budgets compared to what nations had across 6,000 years. Mm-hmm. They would spend 50% of their discretionary funds on arms and defense. And for 80 years, that's just not been the case. Now that has had some really substantial effects. So if America did nothing else, that would be a defense of the American Pax. Must we enter an era to come when the age of empires is over? Unless you play the game Age of Empires.
What do you mean by the age of empires is over? Like, what's that? Well,
the United States is arguably an empire. Would it not possibly in its last 6 weeks.
So if that empire collapses, would perhaps not a new one pop up? So the age of empires continues, it's just a different empire.
Exactly. If this empire collapses, that's exactly what will happen.
Yeah.
We'll probably enter Pax Sinica, and you probably won't like it. No, if we can maintain this Pax for another 30 years, I guess, then the assumptions we all got from Hollywood, including suspicion of authority, tolerance, diversity, and appreciation of individual eccentricity, these were not fundamental human values in other cultures. They are being aggressively pushed by the propaganda department of the present imperial Pax. Mm-hmm. Now, you happen not to think of them as bad propaganda. In fact, some of your listeners are probably objecting strenuously to the notion that they got those values from Hollywood. But name for me a popular film that you've enjoyed since you were 6 years old that didn't preach them. Mm. You've suckled these values all your life in the greatest propaganda campaign the world has ever seen. So what am I saying? Am I saying that invalidates these values? There is very strong reason to believe that there is pragmatic and objectively real reason to believe that they create better outcomes. But it is also not improper to judge those values by the values that you were raised by. And you are rambunctious individualists who appreciate eccentricity, hold authority and suspicion. Okay? It's all right for you to say, fine, all right. I was raised by that. I still believe in it. The only thing I've accomplished by making you say that is to make you aware so that you can be an alpha in this fight and stand to the side and say, which of my trips do I want to keep? And it is highly likely you'll keep the suspicion of authority, the tolerance, diversity, eccentricity. I have very great faith in you that you will keep them. But to be the sort of person who stands aside now and then, who looks in a mirror. For example, when you're in a self-righteous snit, for instance, that bastard sci-fi author Brin supports the Pax Americana. Screw him. When next time you're in a raging self-righteous snit, go to a mirror, look in the mirror, and admit to yourself, this feels good. It is voluptuously pleasurable to be in a sanctimonious outrage. And that is one of our problems. Now, sometimes the thing you're outraged by deserves your outrage. And the force of will that it makes you bring to combat, that's fine. That's why we have it. But to wallow in sanctimony and self-righteousness just because your cause is right, that clouds your judgment, even if you're right. It clouds your judgment. It makes it harder for you to think tactically, to use the powers of empathy to figure out what your opponent is thinking, because they don't think they're villains. Mm-hmm. And if you're sanctimonious, if you're in a self-righteous snit, it clouds your ability to think tactically. And it will make you reject allies who can help but differ with you over tactics.
So was there some inspiration in that in your letter to your conservative friends? And so
well, absolutely. I have been preaching for a long time that people have to, if they're fighting for civilization, we need to peel away from Vladimir Putin and Rupert Murdoch and the Salafists from their alliance, all the casino moguls. We have to peel away people from their alliance. Because in the United States right now, they're running very, very scared. The vast majority of the population doesn't like this crap. And if the election were held entirely on the basis of accurately counted popular votes, this would be a tsunami. So the number of cheats that you will hear about over the next 6 to 8 weeks is staggering, because Vladimir Putin is in the fight of his life. He knows he's waged war on us, and it's generally a bad idea to Pearl Harbor the United States of America. So peeling away just another 500,000.
Yeah.
I mean, that can make their position completely untenable. But I think right now, or in about 50 minutes, the first debate is about to start. And we'll see if old Joe can just hang in there. Just don't do anything stupid.
Yeah. So some remarkable and wise words you've shared there, and I'm trying to choose which one to go down the rabbit hole with. But I think maybe the obvious one to ask is your reminder for us to admit how pleasurable anger can be sometimes, and to try to not remove ourselves, but be conscious of our own emotions in order to be tactical and objective about the situation.
Yeah, nobody's saying don't be emotional. There are reasons why we are emotional. There are reasons why it enables us to persevere in the face of pain. But to have the sapient part of us capable of appraising the moment and saying, this is something I don't need right now. I need to be calm. I need to negotiate at this moment. And I'm starting to get a beard from the sun.
Not coming through too badly on the camera here.
It's kind of cool. Our host Nick will carry a link not only to the self-preventing prophecies and the idiot plot, remind me those two phrases, but also a talk I gave at the National Institutes of Drugs and Addiction on addiction to self-righteous indignation. If you intend to truly be somebody who influences the course of events and doesn't just react to them, then you need to have the sapient part be in charge. Now, this brings us into literature, because I'm notorious for despising Star Wars, and for reasons that aren't the usual ones. I think that it is Nazi-level romanticism, and romanticism is very dangerous. It allows you to create the notion that all of the enemy soldiers can be killed without ever thinking about their mothers. And during World War II, you watch the propaganda films created by Frank Capra, that is never there. Mm-hmm. There is always a moment in those propaganda films that expresses sorrow that we have to kill them. Even when they were using words like Japs and Krauts. That's a difference. And it's a difference between the Enlightenment and Romanticism. The Nazis were an extremely romantic movement. You listen to Wagner. Tolkien, extreme romantic. Notice in Star Wars, in the prequels, the enemy soldiers are all robots. It's okay to kill robots. In the original flick, episode 4, they're all wearing white masks, so it's okay to slaughter them. You can't think about their mothers. And then the clones come. They have no mothers. And it goes on and on and on. In Tolkien, they're orcs. I'm not saying don't fight. Personally, I actually like Tolkien. I think he came by his romanticism honestly. Anybody who had been at the Battle of the Somme and watched the flower of Britain mowed down by tools of modernity might turn against modernity. I might have. Mm-hmm. It's the ingratitude of George Lucas, who was given all these opportunities by modernity, that I don't care for. No, I have a romantic soul, and it comes out at night. And sometimes at night when I'm typing, and I write romantic things. I'm not just talking about kissy romance. I'm talking about Wagner type romance. The Postman has many romantic moments of taking on a hopeless quest. But that side of us should not be involved in policy. Mm-hmm. May we never lose the romantic sensation sitting by a campfire and hearing a twig snap out in the gloom of the forest and imagining anything could be there. the baying of a wolf by the moonlight, these are things we must not lose, but they are for the evening. And by daylight, we have to build a civilization that is just and fair, and that remembers there is such a thing as objective reality. And that is science.
It's to state the obvious, we've obviously haven't done a great job of upholding objective reality in this era of post-truth era. And is that where this comment?
Well, I mean, the fact is that the putinists, the murdochists, have been waging all-out war on the very notion of objective reality. I sometimes dare the conservatives who I think are residually sane, who I lean on, an arm twist. I dare them to name one fact-using profession that is not being warred upon by this very intense propaganda campaign. But we've seen this before. This is exactly the romanticism of the Confederacy in the 1860s, of the Ku Klux Klan, of the Nazis. It actually goes all the way back to 1778, the American Civil War. That's when General Cornwallis invaded and took Charleston in South Carolina and began his Southern campaign, because he knew he would find more romantics in the South who were loyal to the king. And the Northerners were interested in commerce, of all the terrible bourgeois things. So how are we doing here? I imagine you have other questions you wanted?
Yeah. So we're clearly at the precipice then, maybe and you mentioned you can hold two personas, throw the bricks through naive optimists and inspire and uplift the gloomy pessimists. So what is the uplifting arc that we might go through from here? Look at Peter Diamandis,
the guy who runs the
Singularity University.
He runs Singularity University, but the X Prizes. His book Abundance. Then there's The Better Angels of Our Nature by not Peter Singer. You can look it up while I'm talking. Yeah. Attacked by both the right and the left for pointing out vast numbers of ways in which things are getting better very quickly. Mm-hmm. The greatest optimists did not predict how quickly solar and wind power would drop in price. Not their biggest boosters 10 or even 5 years ago expected that the prices for solar and wind and renewables would plummet so rapidly. There are many reasons to believe that we could pull this out of our chestnuts out of the fire if we got our act together.
Yeah. The arc of...
And I hope that a few years from now, I won't be talking to you from the sovereign Republic of California. Because to be honest, that's where we're going to go. And California will become the leading nation of the world. Australia will give it a run for the money, so will Canada. And that there will be good aspects to that, but I'd rather win this phase of the Civil War. And I'm sure that there will be demonstrations of affection if we manage what is our historical duty in a few weeks.
So without trying to pull it back into the pessimistic side, I did try to leave it as in an optimistic angle. Reading through your work and listening to you today, is what's at stake in, the epicenter of this struggle is in the US, but what's at stake? Is it the open society, the democratic society experiment? That's what's at stake. And
Absolutely. And the thing that I was talking about before was freedom is not the core thing because it's so badly defined. Anybody can call it anything they want. Freedom and its related attributes are ingredients for what is truly the innovation of the Western Periclean Enlightenment. And that is what we talked about at the beginning, and that is reciprocal, lateral accountability. And it's inherently competitive. The left has a habit of decrying the word competition. We should all cooperate. What a pile of bullshit. We need to cooperate in order to make the fundamental human trait of competition fair, flat, open to all. And that includes the children whose parents were too poor to compete in their generation. We have 5 competitive arenas. They are markets, democracy, markets for goods and services, democracy for competitive policies, science. There are no more competitive humans that our species ever created than scientists. They're like 6-gun shooters walking down the middle of Main Street. Justice courts are inherently adversarial and competitive, and sports. And the fundamental truth of them all is shown by sports. And that is, sports can only remain entertaining and work competitive in the competition if they are tightly regulated. You try to imagine any sport. I don't care if it's curling. Imagine rugby without any rules, referees, and no penalties even for murder. There would be blood in the first 5 minutes, and there would be no further rugby games after an hour, ever.
I think there's a sport I came across in Italy where it's almost like that. It's a cross between, it's like a Gaelic version of football, but you can box each other at the same time, and they only play it once a year because presumably the men need to go and recover for the rest of the year.
The Mongol people have this thing with dead sheep and horses, and they only play it once a year. I mean, watch the movie Rollerball, the original one.
Yeah,
absolutely wonderful. The point is that if the left makes an error by decrying competition, the right commits a crime by decrying the regulation that is the only thing that allows these accountability arenas, these competitive arenas, to function. And that includes regulation of markets so that they are flat, open, fair, and the quality of output is open for all to see. The regulation of elections to make sure that they are flat, open, and fair. It's only regulated competition using words that both wings despise. And how do we get this regulated competition that is the greatest fecundity of creativity the world has ever seen? By cooperating. We cooperate with each other to make the competition work. And that notion that we cooperate with each other to make competition work is the fundamental that's being destroyed by the oligarchs who want to end this. And it's not actually on the vernacular that I just used to describe this fight. Is not what any of the political pundits would use. Because that's my job. It's to step back and sometimes, like a Tex Avery cartoon character, off the cliff, another 10 feet, another 10 feet, and not look down.
Well, it's a perspective that's sorely missing from most, certainly Australian politics and American, from what I can see, political leadership. There's some rare examples, of course, but it's sorely missing.
Well, I happen to believe that in this phase of civil war, there are sides. And one side is Periclean and the other side is oligarchic. It's usually not that simple. Of course it's not. But right now our political parties map onto the fundamental issue. And we have some footsie-tootsie, preening, prissy types who just say, oh, they're all the same. And on the off chance that somebody might be watching this show with children in the room, I'm not going to express myself.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at my head, right here, that's a picture of Mars. That's a globe of Venus. And that's the cover of my novel that takes you to the sun called Sundiver. And those of you who like comedy, science fiction comedy, I am going to plug my sci-fi comedy that's fresh off the presses called The Ancient Ones.
Excellent. And where can people find that, David?
Oh, that one you can pretty much only get from my website. But many of the issues we've been talking about are in the Transparent Society, of course.
Yeah, I was about to, I'll ask you one more question and then we'll wrap up because I know that you've got to be somewhere. The Transparent Society, when I reread that in preparation for our conversation today, I think that I say this with respect and humor, it was almost published maybe 15 years too early. Do you feel like, have you thought about republishing it?
Same thing with Kevin Costner's Postman movie. There was a hilarious riff on the Stephen Colbert Show, telling everyone, you can find it on YouTube, apologize to Kevin Costner now, because of course the Trumpists are going after the Postal Service.
Yeah.
Well, look, I was asked to do a 20th anniversary edition of the Transparent Society, and I flipped through it and I didn't see a damn thing I needed to change. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, at page 160, I predicted all the cameras cops would wear and that people would be doing cameras back at them.
Yeah.
And what some of the outcomes would be. 9/11, all that. I wish the book were less creepily accurate now, including, the vast proliferation of cameras, the vast proliferation of facial recognition systems. And I sound like a terrible braggart, an egotist, but it's just crying out loud, make me wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tremendous book, and I think the unique perspective I think you're bringing is this short-circuited thinking that cuts through both sides of ideology. And right now, I've been guilty for sitting on the pro-privacy ideology and have tried to understand the national security stuff.
We could have spent an hour on that, Nick.
Yeah.
The fact is that only one human social trait has ever brought people privacy. And we have more of it now than any humans ever had before. It's under threat, of course. But we didn't get it as a gift from those above. They will never do that. We got it by creating a society in which you can catch the people who violate your privacy. And soon they're going to be able to fly a little gnat drone into your house and it'll embed itself in the bedroom and send pictures back to some pimply-faced little 16-year-old geek down the block. And your only hope is that technology is widely shared so that the nearby hobbyist in your neighborhood will ring your doorbell and say, I think I've tracked one of those bastards. And you guys go down the block, ring the doorbell, and tell his mom.
Yeah.
And that's the only way we will have privacy, is if we all of us can see most of what's going on, and we have a social covenant of MYOB, mind your own business.
Yeah.
And if those two things happen, then anyone caught peering at you or bullying you, like in that movie, The Circle, they will be deemed the evil ones, not some eccentricity that you didn't want to share.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, we could go, as you said, we could spend another hour talking about this. But one message that I think is worth bringing up is in this model of lateral accountability, it acknowledges that, you know, pro-privacy is often argued for by one particular group, and it isn't necessarily applied evenly across all different groups. And one of the points that maybe I'm extrapolating too far you made in your book was, if you were to rewrite the book in this Facebook era, you would ask Mark Zuckerberg and his wife and closest siblings and kids to have the same transparency and corrections applied to them.
This is already in our laws. If you are a private citizen and somebody blabs your private stories out on you can sue them for breach of privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, can only sue if it's false.
Right.
He cannot sue for invasion of his personal privacy because he is rich and famous and can presumably take care of himself. This notion that people lower on the, not pyramid, but diamond-shaped middle-class society, that they should have a little extra
privacy
allowances,
yeah,
including privacy. This is already in our morality. And many of the privacy paladins are instinctively reflecting that value. But the problem is, if you ban facial recognition systems, all it will ban is us having them. It's not going to ban the corporations or the government agencies or the rich. It's paternalistic. It's what they do in Europe, and it's well-meaning, and it is diametrically opposite. And let me give you an example. Privacy mavens, when I wrote this book, were deeply concerned that violations of privacy and information flow and data and all of that would have a huge effect having to do with people with pre-existing conditions. They would, if this insurance company found out about your medical records, they would cancel your insurance. Well, that's perfectly reasonable fear about a break of privacy, but they're going to find out anyway. All you can do is delay it with your paternalistic laws. The solution, and the reason why nobody talks about that anymore, was Obamacare. Now, you guys, you already have your sensible medical things. We're still floundering in the caves. But what Obamacare said was, to the insurance companies, we don't give a flying rat's what you find out about your patients. You cannot fire them. And it went away. The solution is to eliminate the harms, not to try to police what other people know, because over the long run, that's a mug's game. There is no way to verify that someone else doesn't know something, especially if they are powerful. You cannot epistemologically know that. You cannot base your safety on an assumption that some elite or another doesn't know something. But epistemologically, phenomenologically, it is possible to base some safety on what you know about them. If they are naked, it means that they can only hire a limited number of trustworthy henchmen for their evil schemes.
So that becomes the middle path. That's what so rather than taking these sort of polar opposites, we argue for lateral accountability and to continue to shine a light on each other as opposed to just one direction.
If we have a value system that says when I discover somebody who is bullying me or invading my curtilage, my private space, or otherwise just not minding their own business and not leaving me alone. And I discover that about that person has that trait of doing that to me and my family.
Mm-hmm.
Exposing them for doing that is going to cause them more grief than anything they're exposing of me. If that is our value system, and that is a value system, by the way, that the Chinese ruling class is trying to avoid with their social credit system.
Mm-hmm.
If we have that value system, then light will enable you to say, leave me the hell alone. It's what you do in restaurants. You go to, well, back when we went to restaurants.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys are about to go back to restaurants, aren't you?
Don't be so sure. Melbourne's...
Jacinda Ardern is starting to take you under her wing. This is how she conquers the world.
Well, Australia's not a uniform blob right now. And Victoria is still...
all right, but she's going to take part of Australia and say, listen to mommy.
Many people will probably take her up on her offer in New Zealand.
Jacinda Ardern for world prime minister. I will press a button.
Yeah,
I will lay my
empire
sword at
out
her
of New
feet.
Zealand.
Where the hell was I?
Your restaurants and...
if you go to a restaurant at least 2 or 3 times in the course of the meal, you'll glance to the left and the right and make sure that nobody's leaning in.
Mm.
It is a crude version of exactly what I'm talking about. We already do it. The point is that none of the paternalistic solutions for this problem, and it is a problem, of how we maintain some degree of individualism and eccentricity and difference and privacy and personal sovereignty.
You know, we're really just chimps with these fantastic tools that we haven't quite figured out how to use with some form of civility yet.
Oh, well, now you're getting into the whole Fermi paradox question and why glass half full,
yeah.
We're the smartest thing ever seen. And we may be the smartest thing ever seen in the galaxy.
Yeah.
And that implies that the whole galaxy is waiting for us. That's a scary burden to place on ourselves. That if we screw it up right now and fall back into feudalism or fry the planet or as we're doing, that the whole galaxy could be in trouble.
Mm.
But I personally think that that is a highly plausible situation, that an awful lot is weighing on what we do in the next 30 years.
That sounds like a really big call to arms worth starting to slow our conversation down on, David. On that note, is there any message or that you'd really like to leave our listeners with?
Nobody's asking you to agree with everything I said. It's not my job to be right. It's my job to be interesting. Mm-hmm. And so, screw your skull back on after I stirred a little. And know this, if things go south, I'll probably be put against the wall before you. So keep an eye on me.
I definitely will. And I mean, all your ideas clearly personally resonate with me. So it's been a real privilege and enjoyable conversation to take hear your perspective on things. Hopefully we can do it again and make sense of, what the next, what happens in the US? How do we make sense of whatever post-election looks like?
I have this bunch of professors. I'm supposed to do a erudite intellectual Zoom meeting on November 6th. And I responded, I said, okay, but we will all be drunk.
Yeah.
Or nursing horrible hangovers. And we'll all be either giddy or suicidal. Yeah. But to those of you who say that 2020 is a really rough year, let me tell you something from an old fart's perspective. you snowflakes wouldn't have lasted 2 weeks in 1968. Now that was a rough year.
Could
So,
you elaborate?
any 2 weeks of 1968 would have broken you. Any 2 weeks of 1968. But we did have good music. And it ended like Pandora's box with a little tiny symbolic moment of hope. And on that note, I'll leave that as an assignment.
Right. Well, the world's looking on, and certainly the stuff we say is, America's clearly gone through periods of collapse and reinvention before.
I am hoping we go back to being your beloved, criticized, stumbling around, shambling, generally meaning well, uncle who helps everyone get across these 30 years and then collapses of exhaustion. I'm just, let's just all agree that would be better than where we're heading right now. Send me an email with a reminder of links, and I wish you and all your pals and all that down there, well, save some room for me just in case.
Thanks, David. I'll hit the stop on the record button, and then I'll do 10 seconds of housekeeping with you, but it's been a privilege.